All right, Stephen, we got one story we wanted to take a closer look at, and it's one that's near and dear to your heart because Flash Memory Summit actually happened last week, but we didn't want to let it get away without having our very own favorite storage expert comment on some of the announcements there. There was a lot of talk around CXL, the new interconnect system. There was also that ever-present discussion of some of the impending issues that happened with Intel Optane, and if you want to learn more about that, you should absolutely check out Stephen's coverage on the Gestalt IT Checksum on our website. Oh, and Samsung had a 128 terabyte SSD that they showed off. Yeah, I got to get me one of those. Steven, what were your big takeaways from Flash Memory Summit?
Yeah, I'm glad that y'all held this for me. I was unavailable for the rundown last week due to a personal issue, but I'm glad that I can join you this week and talk about Flash Memory Summit. So, first off, for our audience, Flash Memory Summit may sound a little nerdy, and you know what? It is. This is an organization, an event focused on the storage industry and not focused on storage buyers as much as the industry itself. This is one of the nerdiest, awesomest events out there because basically every company in the storage industry that's interested in any kind of solid state anything, which is hint the entire industry at this point, is going to be at Flash Memory Summit, and they're all checking out each other's stuff. There's all the press is there. I want to give shout out to my friends Chris Malore and Patrick Kennedy, who we've been talking to about FMS announcements. Thank you guys for being there, for covering it. It was a great event, and as you said, the news at this event was primarily centered around CXL. Now, obviously, Optane's sort of cancellation, check out my checksum episode for more on that, is looming over everything. And apparently it was a topic of discussion. Certainly it was a topic of discussion among the people that I know who were there. And, the consensus is, okay, let's move on, as I said in my checksum episode, Optane is still here. It's still viable. It's still great with Ice Lake. But next generation, we're looking at CXL. And there's a bunch of really cool things that were shown at Flash Memory Summit. Let me take the easiest and frankly least impressive things there, which are unfortunately actually super impressive. So let's start with SSD and Nandflash. So a bunch of companies came out with 200 plus layer flash. I think that we saw quite a few announcements. Micron kind of scooped the industry. We saw SK Hynix there with theirs. We saw a bunch of flash storage devices, including Kioxia, which has XL Flash, which is basically just SLC. So it's really high performance, high endurance flash that could theoretically be used to replace Optane in the chain. We saw a bunch of really high capacity drives from companies like Solidigm, and as you mentioned, Samsung with their 128 terabyte drive that has sort of a folding kind of thing, so it packs in a lot of storage. It's cool stuff. Who doesn't want 128 terabyte SSD? But frankly, that's more cool product stuff. But I think that sort of looking forward, the coolest thing was what happens next. And what happens next is CXL. So our friends over at Memverge, who you will remember got a lot of flack when the Optane announcement came out because everybody's like, oh, well, Memverge is all about Optane. Guess what? They're not. Memverge is all about memory. And CXL is all about memory as well. And Memverge sponsored an entire day of presentations and panel sessions focused entirely on CXL. I don't know if Optane came up except in the Q&A portion. Essentially, what Memverge is doing with CXL is the same thing they were going to do with Optane and the same thing they can do with in-server memory or memory in the cloud. They can do snapshots, they can virtualize it, they can move it around, they can do all sorts of cool stuff with lots and lots of memory. Now, Optane was great because it offered us lots and lots of memory. But again, CXL, the whole point of CXL is that you can have sort of a second tier of DRAM or other memory that's accessed over a PCI Express channel. And that PCIe can either be inside the device, which is something that we actually saw in practice actually working at FMS, or it could be outside the chassis. And that is exciting. Another thing that we got to see at Flash Memory Summit this year was a CXL 2.0 switch. Now, remember, we're still in the first generation of CXL. We're still basically, hey, check it out. We've got some DRAM on the other end of this PCIe link. But CXL 2.0 adds switching. And switching is amazing because essentially what that means is you could have a whole chassis full of DRAM with PCI Express links that all runs into your server. So your server can have all the memory it can eat. Not only that, but that memory can be reallocated dynamically thanks to companies like Memverge and Liquid that are working on technologies that would allow you to do that. The other thing that we saw at FMS, which is very, very important and very cool, is CXL 3.0. That was announced just before FMS, and everybody is buzzing about it. What 3.0 adds is a couple of cool twists. So, as I mentioned, 2.0 has switching, 3.0 has multi level switching. So, the whole leaf spine architecture that you'd find in a network, except it's all PCI Express, it's all high performance. And this enables basically rack scale or even data center scale servers, disaggregated servers to be built around these CXL 3.0 switches. The other thing it allows is much more dynamic access. So you can have direct memory access with peer-to-peer controls. So multiple servers could use the same memory at the same time. This is totally revolutionary. And it is promising to really change everything, the shape of servers in the data center. It also changes the expectations from those servers because, of course, if you can expand a server outside the chassis, then that means that you don't necessarily need to put so much emphasis on tons of cores on the same processor, tons of processors on the same motherboard. All that stuff kind of goes out the window, and we can have much smaller building blocks that can all be combined together into a bigger CXL server. Anyway, that's my excitement about Flash Memory Summit. That's my excitement about CXL. And frankly, as you can see, even though Optane isn't here anymore, a lot of this stuff doesn't really need Optane to go forward. And so we're really excited to see where companies like Memverge go in this CXL world.
And I think you're absolutely right. And we've seen a lot of stories about CXL in the last 6 months, but not directly about CXL, but more about competitors to CXL that are either kind of being folded into the standard or kind of ceding their property to it. And I think that the value there is that by having one standardized platform that everybody is building towards and providing for, that we're going to stop these architecture discussions and really start enabling that to go faster, to be better. And on it, I'm gonna say it because I'm a networking guy at heart, but like it's Ethernet. Like as Bob Metcalf is infamous for saying, I don't know what the future of the network is going to look like, but we're going to call it Ethernet. And that has allowed people to build systems that are fast, survivable, and flexible. Even though 800 gigabit Ethernet doesn't look anything like 10 megabit Ethernet. But what's important is that by building on that one specific infrastructure, you can do things like have a leaf spine CLO architecture CXL switch that will allow you to basically build a data center sized server or a group of composable infrastructure that you can then allocate. And I think that that's where we're going to start seeing real value coming into play for large providers. I no longer have to buy a rack full of 1U or 2U servers and then figure out how to divvy it all up. I can literally buy a rack of servers that are dedicated for GPU or what have you and use CXL to interconnect them all together. And learning from the lessons that the networking world has been learning from for several years, that we were getting rid of this old 3-stage architecture and moving to a 2-stage architecture to reduce latency and provide more survivability and availability, we're going to see more and more opportunity to have these kind of monster machines or have these systems that are dedicated to doing massive AI research, because now we can interconnect them at the speeds that they need to, as opposed to relying on slower interconnects or protocol heavy implementations. So I'm really excited to hear that all of this stuff is, being built on CXL. And like you said, it's funny that everybody shows up with all the news that's going on, and the stalwarts of the anti-CXL league suddenly have changed the banners. And they're like, you know what? CXL is cool, and here's some stuff we're building on to make it work better. So I'm hopeful for the future. And I can't wait to see not only how it affects storage and compute and other things, but will it eventually start pulling in other things as well to kind of interconnect those together? And could we see kind of a more standardized version of maybe using, I don't know, like CXL as the interconnect links between switches, as opposed to having to rely on some of the stuff we've been using so far, which ain't exactly the best. Time will tell, and I hope that we have a good outcome for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to think about what does this change in architecture do, not just for servers, but for everything that you find in the data center. So imagine, switches where line cards are external to the switch or are in their own chassis, or maybe, an architecture where all the top of rack are actually logically part of one switch that spans the entire rack, that kind of thing. And then think of what it can do for storage as well, in terms of having multi-chassis storage devices. Think of how it affects disaggregated and HCI and disaggregated collide with each other. There's a lot of exciting things that you can do with CXL, and I'm pretty excited to see where it goes as well.